Welcome to the NCAA Division I FCS Football Championship Selection 101 presentation. This presentation is designed to help FCS football constituents grab a better understanding of the policies and procedures that are in place for the creation of the Division I Football Championship bracket. Enjoy! As we dive into the policies and procedures for creating the championship bracket, let's start with the 5 general phases of the selection and bracketing process. 1. The committee will determine the 10 automatic qualifying teams that gain their conference's automatic qualifying spot. Second, the committee will select the 14 best at-large teams. Third, the committee will take all 24 teams and seed the top 8 teams in the championship. Fourth, all 24 teams will be placed into the championship bracket. And finally, the determination of host sites for the 8 first-round contests as well as the 8 second-round games is made. The following principles are used by the committee during the selection, seeding, and bracketing process. At no point in the process shall a committee member vote for a team that he or she represents as either an athletics administrator or a conference administrator. The online voting system will allow the committee member to participate in all votes, but they will not be able to vote for their institution at any point during the voting process. Secondly, a committee member shall not be present during discussions regarding the team that they represent during the process. They may only provide answers to general and factual questions about their teams. At that point, they must leave the room for any further discussion. During the selection, seeding, and bracketing process, committee members may use comparative data of individual teams, including, but not limited to, overall record, record against Division I opponents, with a caveat that any institution with less than 6 Division I wins may place that team in jeopardy of not being selected. Also considered, record against opponents from other automatic qualification conferences, record against FBS opponents, head-to-head record, record against common opponents, NCAA simple rating system data, FCS coaches poll, and input from regional advisory committee members. During the selection, seeding, and bracketing process, all votes will be conducted via secret ballot using an NCAA software. All selection, seeding, and bracketing decisions will require a vote of 70% among the committee members involved in the vote, unless otherwise specified in the policies and procedures to follow. Now let's look at the guidelines for establishing the 2014 bracket. These procedures will be followed to select participants and determine the bracketing for the Division I Football Championship. Championship selection. The committee shall confirm the 10 automatic qualifying teams. The committee shall also select the best teams available on an at-large basis to complete the bracket. To do so, they will use the established and listed criteria in NCAA Bylaw 31. There is no limit to the number of teams the committee may select from any one particular conference. The one-loss record of teams will be scrutinized to determine a team's strength of schedule. However, as previously mentioned, less than 6 Division I wins may place a team in jeopardy of not being selected. The committee may give more consideration to teams that have played all Division I opponents. Now let's look at how the at-large nomination pool is established. NCAA staff will provide a list of institutions ranked in the committee's last top 25 ranking prior to the selection meeting. These teams that were in the top 25 will automatically be placed in the at-large nomination pool. Any additional teams that were discussed on the committee's last call but failed to make the top 25 ranking will also be included in the initial at-large nomination pool. At that point, the committee may elect to add additional teams to the at-large nomination pool. In order to do so, a team must be recommended and then receive 30% vote from the voting committee members to be added to the at-large nomination pool. Committee members with teams under consideration may be present and participate in this vote. Once the at-large nomination pool has been determined, the committee will begin their first ballot procedures. During this step, each committee member shall present information from their respective region and conference and discuss those teams that should be considered for at-large selection. This is commonly referred to as the scrubbing process, as the committee members will diligently scrub the resumes and criteria for each team under consideration. Each committee member shall consider the teams recommended for at-large berths and vote for any number of teams that he or she believes are deserving of selection. During the vote, teams that receive 70% of the votes cast will automatically be designated as an at-large selection. However, there is a championship policy that does not allow more than half of the available at-large slots to be filled on any given vote. As an example, at the beginning of the process, there are 14 at-large spots available. So during the first vote, no more than 7 teams can be voted in as an at-large selection. For instance, if there were 8 teams that received the 70% vote to make the at-large field, the committee would then list those 8 teams on a separate poll vote and rank them 1 through 8. The results of those rankings will calculate the top 7 teams, which will move to the at-large field. The one remaining team that finished in 8th place in that voting will return to the at-large nomination pool for consideration on a future vote. After the initial vote is done, the committee will repeat the previous step, with each committee member voting for up to as many teams as there are at-large spots available, and no more than half of the at-large spots can be filled on any given vote. Whenever a consensus cannot be reached, the committee chair may call for a poll vote. During this vote, 70% of the votes are not required, and a simple majority will determine the teams for at-large selection. In such case, the policy remains that no more than 50% of the remaining at-large positions available may be filled on any given vote. Once the 10 automatic qualifying teams and the 14 at-large teams have been determined for the full field of 24 teams, the committee shall then begin the process of seeding the top 8 teams. In this process, committee members will recommend teams to be considered for the seed pool. A team must receive at least 30% of the votes to be included in the seed pool. Committee members with teams under consideration may be present and participate in this vote, but again, may not vote directly for their institution. Each committee member will rank the teams in the seed pool via a poll vote. The teams will be preliminarily ranked according to that vote totals they receive. The committee will review those preliminary rankings and engage in discussion and further scrubbing of the potential seeded teams. The committee will then engage in a second seed poll vote of the teams in the seed pool to determine the top 8 seeds in rank order. Once the top 8 teams have been seeded by the committee will begin the pairings process. The teams awarded the top 8 seeds shall receive first-round byes and are placed into the bracket according to their seed position. The remaining 16 teams will play first-round games and will be paired according to the geographic proximity of their opponents. It is the committee's charge to do their best to minimize the number of flights during the championship. The NCAA mileage threshold for mandatory team ground travel is 400 miles. Therefore, any visiting institution that is less than 400 miles from their opponent shall be reimbursed for ground travel only. Conversely, an opponent who is 400 miles or more away from their opponent will be approved for and reimbursed for air travel to that game. Once the first round matchups have been determined, those first round matchups are then bracketed into the second round matchups according to geographic proximity with the 8 seeded teams. Couple of things to note. Teams from the same conference will not be paired for first round games, with the exception of 2 teams from the same conference that did not play against each other during the regular season. Those 2 teams that did not play during the regular season may be matched up during the first round. Once the first round pairings have been determined, there will be no adjustments to the bracket. A seeded team may play a conference opponent that advanced out of the first round, even if those 2 institutions met during the regular season. Once the pairing process is complete for the first and second rounds, the committee will then begin the site selection determination process for preliminary round games. The following criteria, which are outlined in the NCAA bylaws, are to be used in the evaluation of sites for competition of NCAA championships. As mentioned previously, seeded teams will receive a first round bye, and assuming their facility meets the standards and a financial report meeting the minimum financial guarantee was submitted, those teams receiving a first round bye and are seeded will host second round games. For the first round games, quality and availability of the facility and other necessary accommodations will be a consideration, as will revenue potential, attendance history and potential for attendance history, geographical location, and championships operating costs. The following additional criteria will also be used in determining the site selections. The committee will consider previous crowd control measures and crowd behavior of the prospective host institution regardless of seed. Prospective host sites must submit the following minimum financial guarantees, which are calculated by taking 75% of the estimated net receipts as submitted on the proposed budget. The guarantees by round are $30,000 for the first round, $40,000 for the second round, $50,000 for the quarterfinals, and $60,000 for semifinals. Proposed budgets will not be, and financial numbers will not be provided to the committee until the entire 24-team championship field has been determined and paired. At that point, the committee will review the minimum guarantees as well as other site bid materials. If the minimum guarantees are met, the committee will award playoff sites to the higher seeded teams. When determining host institutions for playoff games where both teams are unseeded, the following criteria shall apply: quality of facility, revenue potential plus estimated net receipts, attendance history and potential, team's performance, including conference place finish, head-to-head results, and number of Division I opponents, and finally, student-athlete well-being, which can include travel and missed class time. The committee will use these criteria to determine first-round sites. Once the 24 teams have been selected to the bracket, been paired, and host sites selected, the NCAA football committee and national office staff will use the following safety net considerations to review their bracket before finalizing. These considerations and principles to be considered are as follows. 1. If a conference has 4 or more teams in the championship, the Division I football committee may allow an additional flight in the first or second round in order to avoid a conference having all of its teams on the same side of the bracket. 2. If a conference champion is bracketed to play a first-round game against a conference opponent, the conference champion should be selected as a host institution. This would be contingent upon the conference champion meeting the facility requirements to host and submitting an acceptable bid by the established deadline. Finally, attempts should be made to avoid repeat games from the regular season, both conference and non-conference, in first-round matchups, provided that it does not create an additional flight. The current pairings policies already preclude conference opponents who play during the regular season from playing in first-round games. These steps, final steps, help the committee and staff finalize the championship bracket. This concludes the FCS Football Selection 101 presentation. We hope the information included provides you with a better understanding of the policies, procedures that go into making the NCAA Division I Football Championship bracket. Thank you very much for listening and enjoy the championship.